Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Min Ed Soda podcast. This is Kip Link along with Todd Van Erp, and today we have a treat for you in here, episode 10. We have brought on a guest that is uh, very innovative and is doing some amazing things in one of Minnesota's smaller districts. And so, Todd, I'm very excited to get to this guest in just a moment.
Well, Kip, I'm still wondering how in the world did you get this guest on? I don't know if you offered the guest like Dairy Queen gift cards or, that's kind of out of our budget right now. Although if we continue to get more listeners on Spotify, you probably need to check how much money we've made on Spotify because I think the last time you said it was 14 cents or something like that. So
We might be up to a full dollar.
well, and if that's the case, maybe we could give our guests maybe a gift certificate for some Bazooka bubblegum.
There we go.
So,
Yeah, actually, you talked about how did I incentivize? We'll just introduce Gina right now. It's Gina Meinertz, and Gina is the assistant superintendent of Spring Grove Schools. And have gotten to do a lot of work with Gina over the last couple of years, working with the Southeast MESPA group. They are an amazing group of principals, and we've especially especially since the start of COVID, has been a really progressive, forward thinking group that we've been meeting regularly with. Last summer, it was every week. And then as the school year came, it was at least once a month. And so I get the privilege and honor of listening to Gina all the time. So welcome, Gina. We are glad you're here.
Thank you very much for inviting me today.
Gina, I said that you are the assistant superintendent at Spring Grove, and Spring Grove has 350 kids. Can you tell me how and why that you are an assistant superintendent in a school district that size? Because I think this is a really phenomenal story.
well, and Kip was saying that you did it through a lot of fast talking, but I want to hear the real story.
Well, really, it started with my transition. I was a elementary principal and curriculum director in Caledonia for 5 years and a great placement. But innovation has always been what I'm looking for, student-centered learning, those kinds of experiences. And so a transformational leader position came open in Spring Grove, and I jumped at it. I really love the idea of transformation. I love to look at systems. I love to work with teachers, and I love to work with students. And so I was a transformational leader for 1 year.
And that was through a grant, correct?
That was a grant. Yep. Through the Bush Foundation, and Spring Grove was working with 2 revolutions in that process. And so the recommendation for Spring Grove on their student-centered learning journey was to create a transformational coaching or transformational leader position. And so when that grant came open, I got to interview for a position that sounded like a dream job, and it was a dream job. So I spent a year coaching. I get to work with my own personal coach, and we are just meeting with students and teachers and parents in Spring Grove to create a journey that's more student driven. And so I got to do that for a year. And at the end of that year, I wanted to make sure that the position stayed, and if the grant money was not staying, what could that look like? And so that's how the title of assistant superintendent was born. Although a lot of my job is still coaching teachers and coaching leaders and working with students and parents. And so I have even the community. So I have a job that means that I work with everybody to help to improve our system.
And as you started to talk there, Gina, there was a couple things that really jumped out in how that this has come to be. And you talked about being student-centered and student-centered at least 3 times in that conversation or in that introduction. And having been down and visited Spring Grove, I know that to be true, that as you were working your way through how are we going to deliver school through the pandemic, just the constant seeking of input from your students and your families, and doing that. And how is that just a result of, like, here we are, this small community, and we're tight knit, that we just have such good connections with everyone? And I know it has to be purposeful, but it seems like you just are always have the pulse of what's going on in town.
Well, I think, yes, part of it is this community. This whole community functions that way. People get together and they want good things to happen. And when you're really small, you need everybody to be a part of that. So there's not a lot of exclusion here. We want the voices and the help from anybody that's willing to participate. So it is part community based, but I also think there's some intention to that. And that intention has grown throughout our school year. We had a partnership with Hamlin University, and our staff had the option to take a culturally relevant student-centered learning course through Hamlin this year as a pilot. And that started in July, right in the middle of planning. And part of that process of learning, so I took that course along with 3 other teachers from our building, and we were going through the action research cycle, but with an equity look to it. And so we'd stop at each phase of the action research cycle and we'd take a look at how do we find hidden voices? How do we dig deeper? How do we make sure that the actions we're taking aren't just for like the loudest voice, but actually for all the voices? And I just think it was the perfect storm, because at that very moment, I was meeting weekly with Kip and daily with everybody in our leadership team to try and decide how are we going to come back to school and stay safe. And we were having design team meetings with students, staff, and parents all summer. And people were showing up, like lots and lots of people were saying, I feel safe with this. And I prefer this. And I cannot teach kids online and face to face at the same time. So that is not possible. Find us something different. And so that's how we ended up with we had all multi-ages K through 4 this year. And we grouped the students per what people felt safe with. And so we started outdoor classrooms because some people would come to school if they could be outdoors more. We started essential worker classrooms. So instead of having like a daycare, if we had to go home for COVID, we instead had classrooms that would function all the way through all year long. And so we created a model that looked very, very different. And it was because we based our model on what everybody was looking for in our community.
And so as you are sharing there, I've been to Spring Grove pre-pandemic, and I saw some of these things going on pre-pandemic as well. And one of those being the multi-age classrooms, and that you've got this opportunity that your students coming through the elementary could, in theory, choose to be in a multi-age classroom all the way through their elementary experience. And in talking with you, that started out of necessity. We're trying to keep our class sizes at a classroom sizes at a decent size, but when you get like 30 to 35 kids per grade level, it's too big to be one section, it's too small to be 2 sections. But through innovation and some other things, you start creating these multi-age classrooms, and now it's not out of necessity anymore, it's out of choice. And can you tell us a little bit more about how that all kind of developed? I mean, I think I stole some of your thunder with the explanation, but just kind of that push and how it's continued even when it's not necessary anymore. Because I think that's also what made your transition into the pandemic a little bit easier, because you were so far ahead of everyone else.
We were ready for flexibility and adaptability here. And that isn't something that I've seen in every school district that I've been in. Our teachers are flexible and adaptable. They work together in teams that aren't always just grade level based. Sometimes they're meeting around a different criteria that isn't just age. And we might meet around content area, or we might meet around student needs. So I think that has helped us in that. And what we have found is that we actually have a step extra in our enrollment procedure in our elementary school. And within our elementary, our parents get to choose if they want multi-age or single grade going into the next year. They also have a no preference category, and that category saves us every time. We're always able to make class lists based on everyone's preference, because there's a large portion of people that are okay with either. They know our staff here, they trust our staff, and they know that the academic experience in either classroom is going to be top notch. And so, yeah, my personal experience is I'm a mom here, and my daughter was a single grade this year and will be a multi-age next year. And I don't know what she'll be the next year. And because of that, I know she's getting a well-rounded experience. She's getting some experiences that might have more social studies and science and outdoor. And then she's getting really strong experiences with language arts and math. And so I think the opportunity for parents and students to have choice really keeps us all together as a community and all trusting each other.
Gina, I have a question for you around the logistics of making that happen. So how do you, as you're planning as a school leader with a schedule and classroom placements and all that stuff, what are the challenges? What are the fun things around planning for that model of delivery?
Well, I would call it phases or a process of decision making. So if you zoom out and look way up above, we started creating our schedule for next year all the way back in January. And we started it with design meetings. And so we just started collecting feedback. And then the walls of my office became filled with feedback from all stakeholders, parents, staff, students. From there, we started to create prototypes, and we've had design team meetings with the staff, the students, and the parents every month since January. And each time we get to a point where we have like a sticking point or a barrier, like we don't know if we should go left or right now. An example of that is happening right now today. We're at our high school schedule right now, and we're trying to make grade bands for 7th and 8th, 9th and 10th, and 11th and 12th. Instead of having some of our traditional grades at those levels also. And we got stuck today. We're trying to create a schedule and we have to make a decision. And so what do we need to do? We need more information from somebody. And this time it happens to be the students. And so on Monday, it's all hands on deck for our leadership team, our counselor, our superintendent. Everybody's going to be talking to every 11th and 12th grader on Monday to find out their preferences going into next year, because we have to know at least 3 new pieces of information before we can build that schedule. And we need it from our students. And we do it all the time. Every survey we send out gets most of the people to respond, because none of them are just like, we usually do a pulse check survey in the fall. But if it's a survey that is leading anywhere in the spring, it's a survey that's going to decide your future. It's going to decide, are you in a multi-age? Is it going to decide what's your preference for this? When do you want graduation? Like, so all of that is based on the stakeholders that are affected by that decision.
I was just wondering about that because earlier in our conversation, when you were talking about basically becoming a student-centered school, you came back to you were talking a lot about getting input from families, from students. And that was, I had a question in that. It was going to be, if you had a piece of advice for schools that are looking to become more student-centered, what would you tell them? And I think I know the answer already.
Well, I would tell them you need to specifically ask your students. And then once you ask them, you have to act on it. They have to see that you value their input enough to make a change. If you're just asking input every once in a while, and then things continue to go status quo, then they're not going to offer that same kind of information into the future. You have to trust the students. Sometimes their first thing that they go for, like we have a student-centered network. They meet sometimes multiple times a month and sometimes monthly. And their huge want right away was more time after lunch for socializing. And of course, no one wants to exactly do that. We know we have so many minutes and so many standards, and everybody's like, what? But what I think they're going for is trust. What they really want is a little bit more say in their day. And so what that turned into during COVID for our high schoolers is an ability to move around the building without the teachers worrying so much about who's supervising them at this very second. And so it doesn't have to be a super long lunch. In the end, what they want is trust and movement and freedom and responsibility. And for us as adults to spend our time checking on the kids that need the extra help, not checking on every kid all the time in the same way.
And Todd, I happen to know that they don't just do this like administratively. A future guest that I'm hoping to have on is Chris Strinmone, and he's got a math lab at Spring Grove where they've got multiple classrooms or multiple math subjects going on at the same time in that space. And he'd shared with me a while ago that, yeah, we constantly are surveying the students and asking what's not working for them, what's not working for them, how could we make adjustments, and then they shift on the fly mid-year. So this is not just this is how we do business as admin. This is like how Spring Grove does business as a whole.
People are conditioned to be ready to give input.
Yeah, and we use like the continuous improvement model through Studer. So we are all trained how to do plus delta feedback and then how to enter that into a stoplight. So this is a problem. These are the solutions. We dig deeper into root causes, and then we take a look at what we need to shift in order to improve that practice.
So jumping back to the multi-age classrooms, which you've been doing for a while, you put them in place in pandemic building wide just to accommodate daycare and different things and how you were going to quarantine and all that. But if we go back to now, we're rolling out, hopefully we are going to lift restrictions. We're going to, I don't want to say return to normal, because I know we learned things through the pandemic, but we returned to better. But what things have you learned about your multi-age classrooms, and like which pairings really work well together and which ones don't? Because sometimes you just have 2 grades together, but other times you've had 3. And what kind of things have you learned as a system that, like, boy, we just can't do that anymore, or this was really super awesome, so we need to make sure we keep doing that?
Or on the flip side, this is really bad, we shouldn't do this again.
Well, I would say as teachers approach multi-ages, there's 2 methodologies, and they have names, but I don't want to throw them out. But there's either like this storylining where you don't feel pulled to like either grade level, but instead you're combining that grade level, at least the social studies and science part of it, together into these common themes or phenomenon and storylines. The other way to teach it is to have all students have a much more independent experience, and everyone needs exactly something different all of the time. And teachers have approached it both ways over time. Neither one is wrong or right, but the one where one teacher is trying to respond to the needs of every single child differently is very stressful for the student and the teacher. It's successful. We saw great learning improvement and achievement, but teachers can't stay in that multi-age long-term because it's so much always preparation for that experience. Where if we use some more storylining and we have our math and reading very specifically at their grade level, but our science and social studies is more reading like a story and ingraining both of our grade levels in it, it's less stressful for everybody. And so that's one learning that we've taken in. Another is we recommend that about 5 students from each grade is in that multi-age. If you get down to only 2 students at one grade level, they sometimes will struggle with the friendships of the different age groups and who they play with and when they play with and how. And so we're trying to make recommendations to group kids with a minimum of 5. Lastly is we need to continue choice. So, as we're doing all of our planning, some people are asking, like, would you ever consider staying all multi-age? That is not something that our parents wanted. Our parents want to be able to move between a single grade experience and a multi-age experience. And so at this point with our families, we will keep both options.
And when I was there visiting, and now this is almost a full year and a half ago, you had a pairing of 2, 3, and 4, grades 2, 3, and 4. And I remember the teacher making a comment, and we walked into his room and he's like, well, if I were to do it again, I'm not opposed to 3 grades together, but I would shift. I would be a 3, 4, 5 instead of a 2, 3, 4, with the rationale of, like, at 2nd grade, we're still kind of teaching kids to read. And from 3rd grade on, we are, it's moving from the learning to read to reading to learn mentality. And, have there been any other little nuggets like that you've kind of found
we
along the way?
listened to that nugget. We had a 3, 4, 5 this year, and it went much better than the 2, 3, 4. And it was just because their needs were very similar, and they could still do some things together, but then do other things apart. And so, yes, that is an important nugget. If you look at, I was a Montessori teacher for 9 years, and they use the planes of development to decide their grouping for multi-ages. I would really look at developmental needs, standards needs, make your decisions based around some reasoning that is research-based.
Not just about the number of kids that you have.
Yes, correct.
Now, one other area, I know we're starting to get a little bit long on time, but one other area that I really wanted to dig into is that you mentioned it earlier, but I'd also talked to Todd about it before too, is because of COVID, you implemented some outdoor classrooms. And how did that go? And are they going to continue post-COVID?
Yes, so it went fabulously. The 3 teachers that were outdoor learning classroom teachers have had one of the best years of their life. They say that it has completely changed the way they teach and the way they see students learning. If they were to reflect on how students learn, they have so many questions, they observe differently, they apply their learning differently. And they're guiding the learning process so much more because they're inquisitive and they want to know more about the world around them. When we were asking parents about outdoor learning, we did not include that question in our survey this year. And that's because these teachers don't want to ever stop teaching this way. They don't want it to just be seen as an outdoor classroom as a separate school. Instead, they just say that outdoor learning is essential to their learning atmosphere. And so these 3 teachers will never stop using the outdoors in their classroom. And so they just will know that, they'll communicate that with their families, and the families will be a part of that learning experience. We still have the shelters that the city built for us. So we have outdoor classrooms and we have indoor classrooms. And we will continue partnerships through, we're actually just growing our partnerships for next year. So our elementary will keep a partnership with one of the parks. Our middle school is going to have a partnership with a park, but also with a farm in the area. And we're also starting a partnership with the Heritage Center in our town so that our students' work is going to be displayed at the Heritage Center if it's something that's research-based. So I'd say we're just growing our experiences that are community-based. So it's not going to be just outdoor learning, but more like a community-based learning model.
I think we may have to have Gina back for a whole nother show just on that topic, Todd.
Yeah, as a former science teacher, when Kip started telling me about outdoor learning, I'm just like, wow, I want to learn more about this. So yes, we need to get Gina back here to talk specifically about that, because there's a lot of questions that I have about just like like nuts and bolts way, like how does that look? How do you set that up as a teacher? What are the pitfalls? What are the celebrations? And I think one of the cool things is, one thing that's come out of this is some of the partnerships that you have formed because of your commitment to outdoor learning. So I would love to hear more about that too.
Well, and I think a huge part of that too, and maybe I'll save it for a little bit more of my big takeaway at the end of our time today, but it's just like, it's a constant relationship between the school and the community. I mean, we see it in a lot of places, but I haven't seen it as strong as I do in Spring Grove all the time. And just in terms of the school needs the community to survive, and the community needs the school to survive. And so it's just this amazing partnership of, even like, talking about how can our business community help make sure that we can keep an assistant superintendent. So we can keep doing some of these transformational changes and different things. And so again, we probably had a whole nother show because we're already over 20 minutes today. So
yeah.
Yes, I'd be happy to come back and talk about more of the things that we're starting.
Awesome.
But we're not going to let
make
you
sure
off
you get that on the.
I was gonna say, we're not gonna let you off the hook for today, because Todd's got some rapid fire questions for you first.
Yeah. Okay. Are you ready for this, Gina?
I'll try.
Okay. So we're just going to ask you 5, because the last few weeks we've been talking way so much that we lose track of time. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how cool are you, with 1 being not cool at all and 10 being super duper cool?
I think that depends the day. I think I vary between 1 and 10 many times within any day.
Okay, so where are you right now?
7.
7? Okay.
Underselling. I think she's at least a 9.5.
Yeah, I gotta believe
Thank
that too. I gotta believe that too. Have you ever tried to do something you know you were really bad at, and what was that? Have you ever tried to do something you know you're really bad at? What was it?
Oh yeah. Lots of things. Something that comes to mind is like trying to walk on these like tall, stilty sticks. Like I was trying to do that at Christmas this year. It was an event.
And you stayed out of the emergency room, I'm assuming?
I was not injured, but it would have been funny to catch on camera.
Nice. If you could get a yacht, and I know you don't have a lot of water around there in Spring Grove, but if you could get a yacht, what would you call it?
I don't know. What's that guy that has all the jokes about him? The Texas Walker Ranger guy. Oh, Chuck Norris.
Chuck.
My friend in college, my friends and I all had this boat that was really tiny, but we'd go out on this tiny boat and we called it the Chuck Norris. So I would call my yacht the Chuck Norris.
There you go. If you could talk to the president, what would you talk about?
Education, moving funding from the defense fund to education, because then we'd be preventatively providing peace and service to our world instead of always responding with violent or forceful action.
Nice. Last question. This one's really deep. What is your lifelong dream?
Like just like a purpose in the world dream, or like something I'd really love to do, like bucket list?
You could choose however you want to interpret that question.
I'll take the dream of my professional and personal dream is to change education so that people see the opportunity of the relationship of students and adults, and that our children they're born with love and peace and joy and curiosity in their hearts. And if we could find and learn from those things from children more, then our world would be a better place.
Wow, I think we need to record that snippet and just kind of keep it, right? And be able to acknowledge.
If you could record that, Kip, and put it on a loop, we could send it out. We'd probably sell it.
If only it showed up on like a podcast or something.
I know, a good one, right?
There's the catch. It's not a good one.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gina, for spending some time with us. This was amazing.
Awesome.
I know as a principal leadership support person, we tap into Spring Grove often. One of our colleagues out of Twin Cities also calls your superintendent for regular things. You all are, I call, and I'm not talking politically here, I call Spring Grove probably like the most progressive small district in the world, right? Like that you guys are doing some amazing work down there. And here's my big takeaway. It's all rooted in that relationship that you have established with your community, with your students, with your teachers. And it's just that constant feedback. And how could we do this differently? How could we do it better? What works for all of us? It is just an amazing work being done in Spring Grove. So I think you're well on your way of changing education.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, and I was going to say that too, Kip. My big takeaway is just that focus on gathering input from your students, your families, and then putting it into practice, not just gathering information and letting it sit in an electronic file somewhere, actually doing something with it so that you're meeting the needs and desires of the people that you serve. So I know that will be something that I'll be sharing with schools that I work with. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, that is going to wrap up episode 10 of the Min-Ed Soda podcast. You can find Todd and I on Twitter with the hashtag MinEdSoda, or Todd's at Principal Learner, even though he doesn't know how to spell principal. And I'm at Kip Link, and we'd love to hear from you. And thank you once again, Gina, for joining us today. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Have a great day, everybody.